to do this planned in advance, so I wasn't sure how to get everything to work. And so I see there's already 6 people in the chat, so that's great. Go ahead and say hi so I can know who's there if you want to let me know. All right, Adam, great. It's good to see you. All right, so if there's ever technical problems, like you can't hear me or you're having problems, let me know in the chat so that I know. But it seems okay because it seems like everybody can hear me. All right, so I think this is the third Q&A that we're doing. Haha, yeah. Well, Josh Martin says, congrats on the, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Quaron, is that how you pronounce the name? A compliment. My last video was a video on gravity, and the director of the movie, he shared it. I tweeted at him with the video that I did, and then he retweeted it saying very cool, something like that. So that was fun. It's the second time this happens. It happened also with James Mangold for the Logan video that I did. So that's pretty cool. We would wish that it would bring more views, but it's not necessarily the case that that's what it does. But that's okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to, as usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the questions that were asked on Patreon from the $10 plus, and then all you guys in the chat, if you have more questions, go ahead and ask them. And if we have time, then I will get to your questions. One of the things I'd like to know from you guys in the chat, if you want to give a few comments, I want to get people's ideas, impressions about the reading list that I gave you. For those that haven't seen it, I put up a first draft of a reading list. In the end, it's going to go up on the website, but for now, I wanted to put it out in a more limited forum with you guys to see what you think. And so it would be good to hear your opinions on what I put up there. There's going to be more. There's probably going to be a section that's going to be fiction. Right now, it's all mostly theoretical stuff. And there'll probably be a section that's also going to be on history too, kind of some resources to get a general sense of history. All right. Okay. So first question that I've got is by Nathan Seabrandy. I don't know if that's how you pronounce your name. Nathan wrote me a message just about 20 minutes ago saying that he will be joining in our discussion from his honeymoon. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but he said he got a break from his honeymoon to be able to join in on our discussion. And so probably so that he could hear the answer to his question. And his question has to do with this. So his question is, can you talk about the biblical symbolism behind the idea of the church being the bride of Christ? I'm getting married on Saturday, which I guess has already happened. Congratulations, by the way, Nathan, for your wedding. And this is one of the sticking points for my fiance and I in our respective families. They seem to use this symbolism to suggest that the wife should be subservient to her husband, while the husband should love his wife as Christ loved the church. Any insight you can give on St. Paul's letter would be appreciated. All right. So so I think you're referring to that text in Ephesians that talks about the relationship between Christ and the church, and between a husband and his wife, but also in a way a husband and his family. And I think that here, this is really where you can see the difference between, let's say, when we talk about hierarchy, and when I talk about hierarchy, it's very important to understand that, especially when we're talking about the church and we're talking about a Christian hierarchy, it's quite different from what you could call a a pagan hierarchy or a more secular hierarchy, or let's say something like a military hierarchy, let's say. And so what's really interesting in Ephesians, which is, it's funny that you're asking that question, because on Sunday I went to visit a church that was being run by an old friend of mine from when I was a teenager. It's actually a Baptist church, and I was visiting his church, and he talked exactly about this text. And so it's just funny that this is happening now. What's interesting to notice is just how the contrast between the way that Paul sets up the relationship between the husband and the wife, between Christ and the church, and the way that it's set up in Christianity. And so the way that it would have been set up in the Roman times would have been a strict hierarchy. That is, the way it's set up is that you have the master, you have the top of the hierarchy. It could be the king, it could be it could be the man of the household, or it could be any kind of social hierarchy. The top of the hierarchy, everybody that's under that person is there to serve the top of the hierarchy. So the man is at the top and his wife is under him. The man gives direction and the woman follows the direction. Then his children also, at the same time, his servants in his house or his slaves would have been also part of his household. And then everybody would be kind of aligned on the top of the hierarchy, and were there to submit their will to the top of that hierarchy. Now, we still have hierarchies like that today. We still have plenty of them. Often corporate hierarchies work that way, and military hierarchies work that way. And there's nothing wrong per se with that hierarchy in itself. It's just one form of hierarchy. It has some problems, but for sure the Christian hierarchy presents a different vision, and it presents a vision which is viewed in light of the message of Christ, and the idea that God loves the world. That is, that in a way God created the world to serve him, but at the same time there's this weird relationship where at the same time God loves his creation and wants to be joined with his creation, up to the point of actually becoming incarnate within his creation. And so in the Christian household, then you have you have the normal hierarchy. That is, in the notion is that the man is the head of the household, that he gives, let's say, the direction, he gives identity. We still have that symbolism in the notion that, let's say, a wife will take her husband's name, for example. And so, but at the same time, it's quite different, because then it's almost like an interesting completeness where the man, although being at the head of the family, his purpose is to give himself to his family. So his purpose is to love his family, to care for those that are his are under him, you could say, or that he, of whom he's the leader. Okay, and so it doesn't become just this let's say strict top-down hierarchy where the purpose is everybody needs to serve whoever's on the top, but then it becomes this relationship where the husband is the woman can give herself to her husband because she knows that her husband is acting in her best interest. And so there becomes this complicit relationship between the two, and then that ends up being manifested in the church itself. We have this idea, in Orthodoxy, we do not have the idea of irresistible grace that is presented in some Protestant circles. We really have this idea that you need an amen for the church service to even be valid. That is, there is this relationship even between the clergy and the church, where the clergy acts as the top of the hierarchy, let's say, and represents in a manner the divine coming down and encountering humanity. But then the human aspect, or the church, has to answer. And so you can really almost see it in as a loving relationship between a man and a woman. And so the man, let's say, advances towards the woman, even in a sexual way. The man advances towards the woman, but the woman has to answer, right? The woman has to answer, and then there's this play between the active aspect of the man and then the receiving aspect of the female. But the receiving aspect of the woman has to be a yes, has to be an amen. Okay, so this complementary relationship between the world. So when you start to see the world that way, then everything is transformed, right? Even our relationship to nature is transformed, right? We no longer have this idea of nature as something that we only act upon, right? This kind of simple vision of the civilizing human who just kind of imprints on the world and basically sets up, their civilization. Heidegger talks about this in this idea of seeing nature as this standing in reserve, right? They're just waiting for us to use it and to impinge on it our will. But rather, there's this back and forth play between the let's say the acting aspect of the human being and then the possibility of reception from nature. And so nature has to kind of say yes in a way to the way we act upon it, and has to answer. And so there's this constant interplay between the different aspects of the hierarchy. And so in that way, and that's why there's so much of, that's why, for example, the Song of Songs is really this representation of Christ and his church, but also a man and his wife. That is, if you read the Song of Songs, you will see this interplay between the man and the woman, this kind of the man as the kind of the active character who's approaching his fiance, who's approaching his lover, and then the lover who is answering and then opening the door, and all this imagery that is there, this quite explicit imagery actually that is there in the Song of Songs. And so I hope that answer. You have to be honest. It is an offensive. Even what I said is offensive to modern sensibilities, right? Because we really do have this idea that that everybody's the same, and that everybody's role is the same, and that everybody, that even the notion that, for example, that in a family, the man would have a function of a leader is offensive. But that is really the way that St. Paul presents it, and I think that if it's properly done, then everybody kind of finds their place in a way. But it's weird to say it that way, because we always have to understand also that everybody has those two roles. That is, everybody is, and so the man, for example, is feminine to the extent that he's part of the church and then answering, let's say, Christ's call, right? And so it's not that one is good or the other is bad, or that we all in our lives and even in our own selves, we have, for example, this relationship between our higher aspects, our what you would call, our thought, our idea, our thinking, and then our bodily existence. And then we need to have this same kind of interplay between the two. If we fly up too high just in our head, then we become disconnected, and we're not integrated. But we need this integration. And in the same way, when I let's say submit myself to the laws of the land, in that relationship, I'm acting also in a feminine guise, let's say. And when a woman, let's say there's a leader amongst women, and there's a woman who's kind of leading other women, then that woman has some masculine function in that group, like an abbess, for example. If you saw abbesses in monasteries in the Middle Ages, they have the right to carry shepherd's crooks, just like the bishops, and wear crosses and all this stuff. They would actually wear some implements of authority. And in the same way, let's say a queen or an empress when she acts, or even the Queen of England, for example, the way that she acts, she actually has a masculine function. And then we, as her subjects, whatever, like, in a way, actually, I am one of her subjects, I guess. It's hard to realize that because I'm French Canadian, but then we have a feminine role regarding her. So we have to be able to understand the structure, how it's not arbitrary, but it also is not as limited and as obtuse as some people want to make it. So I hope that that helps you. All right, so Nathan Sibrandi is in, but I don't know if he was able to hear the so Nathan, if you're there, tell me if you heard my answer. If not, you can listen to it later. All right. Okay. So David Alexander asks, what thoughts do you have on teaching art to children as a gateway to learning about ultimate things and experiencing God? Where would you start, and when and how? How have you taught your own children? Well, for me, I don't, it's funny because I don't see the world in those categories. Let's say I don't think that art is something we'll get to that, because there's another question in here that talks about art, and maybe I'll get into it to my definition of art and why it's a bit different from the modern definition. But I would say that images, for example, I think that if you think about it that way, how we can experience God through images, how we can experience God through music, how we can experience God through let's say architecture. Now, if you're more specific about it, then I think that's maybe helpful, in the sense that then you just need to be attentive to the specifics, and not necessarily have this idea that that you're going to initiate your children to art, because I don't really know what that really entails. So I think that for example, myself in church, what I'm doing, I go to an Orthodox church. Obviously, it's a bit different, but what I do is that when there's a feast, I will go up with my children, and when we venerate the icons in the church, then I'll take a few seconds right there in the church before the service, or even during the service sometimes, and just kind of point to them the icon and ask them if they know what the icon is. And then afterwards, sometimes, because I do sometimes a little kind of Sunday school with my kids during the homily of the priest, then I'll take them out, and then I'll ask them, did you look at the icon? What did you see? Help them to develop a kind of visual language. The same way when you're with music. I mean, with music, I'm not a very musical person. One of the things we did was kind of offered our kids musical lessons if they wanted them, and so both two of my kids took some lessons a little bit, but it didn't catch on, I guess. I don't know. And so I think that you have to kind of do it in the specifics, and then help your children see the connections between things. And so I've done it also in my history classes a little bit when I teach, because we do homeschool, and in my history classes, during the history class, I always take a little parenthesis and then show the art of the period and talk about the relationship between the visual arts, let's say the painting, and the architecture that was developing, and what was happening in culture, and then to be able to show how it's not arbitrary, that there's actually a relationship between, let's say, the spiritual movement in a people, or in a certain time, and how it and then trickles down and manifests itself socially, but then also in the way that human beings then create objects, create images, create music. And so that's been a way that I've been doing that. And then if you want to have this idea of experiencing God, then you can always kind of go back and show the difference, let's say, between Picasso, and an icon, or or a sacred, or another form of sacred art, between a modern factory building and a traditional ancient building, and to show how the kind of brutality of contemporary architecture is not conducive to elevating the human spirit, whereas, let's say, traditional architecture was actually designed to do exactly that, to elevate the human being, to kind of to help them frame their perspective in a way that was more helpful, let's say. All right. And so actually, so the next question, wait, let's see. Let's go for that. The next question that talked about art, because I think, where is it? All right, yeah. So the next question actually is right there, by Gavin Doughty, asking, when came the modern obsession with defining art? Did there used to be a cultural consensus on what art is, should be, or was it not even a question that needed raising? So this is a really important subject. And so if you want to get a good answer to that subject, you can look at the reading list that I gave you guys. There's a book in there called, I think it's called Christian and Oriental Philosophies of Art, something like that. It's by Ananda Coomaraswamy. Ananda Coomaraswamy was I think, Nepalese art historian who was a big deal in the early century. He was actually curator of the Boston Museum, and he developed a lot of kind of Eastern Asian studies. But there's some problems with his book, but I would say that it's really useful in helping people to understand the difference between the traditional notion of art and the contemporary idea of art. So in a traditional way, you can see that also in Heidegger. If you read Heidegger, the questions concerning technology, for example, he talks about this problem. And so, first of all, in ancient times, art wasn't something, wasn't a thing. It was a skill, right? It was a way of doing things. And so that's really important. And so that's why we still have this idea when we say liberal arts college, like what does that mean? Why is psychology still, considered part of the liberal arts, for example? And so it was really applied knowledge. That's what art was. It was using the let's say, principles of the world, using the kind of forms, Platonic forms, you could say, but then using them in a manner, applying them to the world. Okay, and so that is what art was. And so it's very different from the way that we understand it. And so there's an art of beer, there's an art of cheese making, and there's an art of image making, and there's an art of sculpture, an art of music, So it's the proper manner of putting things together. And so the word art actually, the root of the word of art actually comes from this idea of putting things together. And so in Heidegger's question of concerning technology, he really talks about this idea that art is a gathering, right? It's very close to this notion of symbolism that I'm talking to you about. It's a gathering of things together through your skill, through your art, into a cohesive whole, which reveals something about the being of what you're doing. And so when you make a chair with art, you take wood, you take different physical aspects and also different concepts, and you pull them together and you make a chair. And if you make it with art, then it reveals something, reveals the chairness of the chair, Okay, now I'm using Heideggerian language. Sorry about that. You're revealing the essence of what it is that you're making. And so that is really the traditional art. There's this saying, Coomaraswamy likes to use this saying, that in the Middle Ages, let's say, the art always remained in the artist, right? The art was not the object that he produced. It was the skill, the mastery that he had acquired. Okay, and so when you start to think that way, it creates some major transformations. If you really are able to engage that way of thinking, it creates major transformations, because the first thing it does is that there is no such thing as art which has value because it's art, right? This idea that, oh, it's art, and so therefore it somehow has value. It's like, I call bull on that. You're right. I don't care about art. It's not a category in terms of the objects, like the art objects. I don't care about that. That category is not interesting to me. My question is, the object itself, what is it? Like, what is it doing? What is it doing in the world? And I'm not saying it necessarily has to have a fully practical application, though I do think that in terms of a material object, it's probably better if it does. It's probably better because a material object actually has to physically exist in the world. It's better that it justifies its space, the space that it's taking, that it that it actually has a function. But there is possible that it can also have a poetic function as well, just like, let's say, a song or a poem. It's a poem or a work of literature. That's fine, but then it's like this argument that people will present us that something somehow has value just because it's art. That if you're able to break that way of thinking, you're going to free your mind quite a bit, and you'll be able to think very differently. So seriously, it doesn't matter, what the cultural consensus on art is. It doesn't. To me, that really is not important. My question really, in terms of the objects or the artifacts that are created, do those have value? And if so, what is their value? It can be to create prestige. Jeff Koons sculpture is mostly there to create prestige for the person who buys it. And so that's it. But at least let's be clear about what its function is. Let's not pretend that it has value in itself, like art for art's sake, all that stuff. I think it's useless. All right. So Drew McMahon asks, can you talk about your conversion to Orthodoxy? Specifically, what was it about the Protestant faith that you did not align with? Does the faith plus works equal salvation, which Protestantism disagrees with, carry any weight? Or asked another way, do you believe by faith alone is incorrect? And if so, why? I think it's a good question. I like the way you formulated it. It will help me to answer without getting scattered all over the place. If you want the story of my conversion from Protestantism, there are several places online where you can find it. There is a podcast on Ancient Faith Live by Father John Parker. So if you Google Father John Parker and Jonathan Pageau, you'll find I did a podcast with him where I tell the story of my conversion. So that can be helpful. But in terms of faith plus works equals salvation, this is really where I think Orthodoxy has a lot to offer the West and has a lot to offer our thinking, is that the Orthodox don't view salvation so much in legal terms as happened in the West. And so this idea, for example, that, like the Augustinian idea that man fell and that because of that, we're all sinners, like we're sinners, we have a fallen nature. Okay, that type of thinking is just not part of Orthodoxy. It's not that you can maybe not find it in very marginal text, but in the main thrust of Orthodox thinking, we don't at all have the idea that man has a fallen nature. We have the idea that through sin of Adam came death, right? And then death became part of the human experience. And through death, right, that is death, that is the tendency that we have to move towards fragmentation, and also the threat of the outside world on us, to feel that threat, that we're in danger, that all those elements of death bring us to sin, right? That is, you can imagine it right away. It's like you think you're not going to have enough food, and therefore you're willing to do some certain things. You're willing to hurt people. You're willing to take from others because you feel that threat of death. Okay. And also at the same time, a kind of flip side to that is the pride that can kind of be the weird flip side to the world of death, where on the other hand, you also think that you're self-sufficient, that everything is owed to you, that you yourself are God. And so therefore you are willing to do things to others that are in line with that way of thinking. Okay. So that the dynamics of death bring about sin. Okay. And so in a way, we've all sinned, right? We've all sinned because we're caught in that. We are, but we don't have a sinful nature. The human nature, our human nature is still created in the image of God, and so there is a divine spark. Usually, Saint Gregory of Nyssa and the others will present it as this divine spark, which is there at the core, but it's kind of dirtied. It is, it's been covered with too many layers. It's been disfigured. The image has been disfigured, let's say. So the image is still there, but it doesn't resemble God as much as it did before. And so we need to restore its capacity to resemble God. Okay, so that's kind of how we see it. And so because of that, we just don't, salvation is just not seen as this idea that you need to do things in order to be saved. That is, that this idea that God is holding a calculator, and then he sees that you're not doing right, you're not doing the right thing. It's like, oh, here you are, you didn't do the right thing, you're bad, you sinned, you're going to hell. And then the Protestant idea that because of that you can't do anything, so all you need is faith, and then because of faith and that evil thing you did is kind of, it's taken away and put in Christ, but then then you go to heaven because of that. And then the idea or the other idea that you could somehow accumulate enough good works, you could do enough good things that God would say, okay, well, let's see, that's pretty good. Okay, so you're okay. I'm gonna accept you, right? There's an arbitrariness to the whole process. The most Orthodox don't see it that way. That is, sin is itself a fall, right? It takes you away from yourself. It makes you a slave to your passions. It makes you a slave to the outside world. It makes you think that certain things are God's, right? You serve all these different things, and then you end up being pulled into all these different directions, and you're scattered, you're pulled apart, and that's what sin is, right? Sin is missing the mark, it's kind of shooting off in all these directions. So you're fragmented, you're scattered, you're not a whole human being that is held together and can reflect the image of God. Okay. And so that's what sin does to you, and what it does to you, that's the process of death itself, which leads to hell, right? Which leads you to hell. And it just happens, it happens on its own. That's what happens when when you're falling. Okay. And so the idea is that through faith, right, through trusting the invisible, through trusting, even though you can't totally grasp it, you can't see it, by committing yourself to the infinite, by turning your head, right, turning your head towards in the right direction. Okay. And even though you're still kind of sinning and you're still doing things, just basically turning your head in the right direction is the first step. And that also cannot happen without grace. So grace calls you. So there's this calling, right? From the infinite is always calling you, and you can feel that in you. You can feel this call to be better. You can feel this call to align yourself. If you're attentive to it, there's the grace of God is working and calling you constantly to come into communion with God, right? To enter into communion with the infinite. And so this grace, which you have to answer by faith, that is turning your, trusting that call, trusting the call which you receive, then that's the first step. And so the idea is that then there will be works, but the works aren't seen as, okay, so now I'm Christian, I'm saved, and so now I need to do all these things to make God happy, and so that he won't be angry with me anymore. It's like that's not the. I mean, you can represent it that way. That's fine, but you have to be careful to see it only as a representation. A better way, and I would say a more helpful way to see it, is that you have faith, you turn yourself towards the infinite, and then in that faith you're going to move, right? Your works are going to manifest where you're looking. So your attention, your trust is on God, is on Christ, and so therefore that's what you're going to start to become. And so that has to manifest itself in works. If there are no works, that is, if your attention is on Christ, and your attention and your trust is on Christ, but then you still hate your neighbor, you're doing all these crazy things, you're doing all these horrible things, then it means that you're deluding yourself. You're not actually trusting Christ. You don't have faith, right? And so faith has to manifest itself at work with works. There is no other way. It has to, because the works are you moving towards that call, right? And you can't do it without the call. You can't do it without grace, right? You can't do it, and you need faith, but then the works are necessary for you to become something else, and the works themselves are you becoming something else. They're the fruit of you becoming something else. Okay, so I hope that helps. It's really not the same way of seeing it, but I think most people can kind of understand it, especially if you've been following my lectures for a while. And so hopefully that is enough to answer that question. All right. All right. At some point recently, you mentioned how our inverted world and materialism meant that the new religious order would be far different from what we have now. Any ideas what it might be? A symbolic sort of church, perhaps including polytheism with gods such as Marduk, Zeus, or is your vision of that more dystopian? This question was asked by Riss Oliver. All right, Riss. No, I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. Okay, so this has to do a little bit with the I think that I'm going to say it first in purely Christian terms, like purely religious terms. And then after that, I'm going to unpack it for you, okay? And hopefully this will help you to understand. I think that until the return of Christ, there is no other way of doing things for us Christians besides being in the church, okay? All right, so now what does that mean? That means that I don't think that we can make up a new religion. I think that people have been trying to do that for the past century, and it's failed miserably. Theosophy, Mormonism, and all the New Age crap. All that stuff. It's just not working. It's not at all sustaining the world the way that the church sustained the world. And so I think that we have to remain in the Christian story until the return of Christ. That is, until the end of this age, until the on the horizon of the human experience, the Messiah appears, in a way that is unmistakable and that no one can deny, and that is going to transform everything. And we can't make that up. And I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. And I think that we have to be careful not to be too, when Christ talks about the return of Christ, he says, if anybody says, here he is, that's not true. And so then what? I don't know. And that's the kind of this ultimate surprise of how this whole story, the whole story of the last, I don't know, more than 2,000 years, I would say the last 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years is going to resolve itself. I think, I don't know. And so I don't think that it's useful to, let's say, to imagine what that's going to be. I think for now we need to attach ourselves to the story which is there, especially in this time of fragmentation and in this time where everything's kind of breaking apart. It's, you know, it's not, I don't think it's the time for all these people to like come up with their new stories. Well, we see what it does. We see because everybody, we can see it, that's what the late 20th century has been. Everybody has their own little opinion, and everybody has their own little thing, and the world is breaking apart and falling apart. And we have all these weird sects and all these weird pseudo religions coming up, and also people becoming, you know, kind of fake Buddhists and becoming fake Hindus and becoming, you know, I don't think that's feasible. I don't think it's feasible for the world to sustain itself. I think the only way to do it is for us to continue the story which is there, and we're in the Christian story. I think that's at least us. Like, and don't tell me about the Chinese. People say like, whoa, what about the Chinese, and what about some, you know, what about the Hindus? It's like, you're not a Hindu or a Chinese. If you are, then what I'm saying, you know, then I don't know. But most of you, I'm pretty sure that most of you people that are listening to me and that are following my videos are in the Christian story. I'm pretty sure that's a fact. All right. Also, I have to say something. Like, there's something I really have to say. I'm going to make a second video based on the Santa video that I did, because it raised a lot of questions for people, and a lot of people, you know, are ask some good questions, and I think that there are ways that I can talk about this to help people understand it even more. But I think it's really important to get your head, get this idea of monotheism versus polytheism, to get that out of your mind, because it's not the right way to see the world. This idea that Christianity is monotheism, and then there other religions are polytheistic. You know, it's a dangerous way to view the world. Christians believe in one triune God that is infinite, that cannot be defined completely, that all definitions come short of the infinite to which God is identical. Okay, then under God there are principalities, there are angels, there are all these angels that are principalities of different aspects of reality, of different aspects of the world, and act as messengers for the infinite into the world. And so and so it's not that there's just you and God, and that's a really weird way of thinking. It's a very kind of enlightenment, maybe modern way of thinking. But if we understand that there are all these principalities, you know, the problem with paganism was maybe mostly that it didn't reach up into the infinite, that their principalities, you know, did not point towards the highest and towards the infinite and the uncreated, and, you know, what people usually call monotheists, what they are talking about, you know. So I think that that's important, because it's like, and it can also help you to understand. I'm going to do the video, but I guess I'm giving you guys a preview now. It can help you to understand why, for example, when Christianity came on the scene, why the church fathers said things like the pagan god were demons, right? And so it's not necessarily that they were completely denying the existence of these principalities. It's only that because these principalities were not pointing towards God, were not submitting themselves towards one transcendent reality, then they ended up being evil spirits. They're evil spirits because they're pulling in all these different directions. And so the paganism, you know, especially like if you look at late Greek paganism, you know, it's a chaotic jumble of competing principalities that fight between each other and are constantly competing for which principality is going to be on top. Okay, and so you could say, so a good way to express that is to say that those principalities are demons, because they're not, they're kind of wild principles, I can't use a better word than principality. Wild principalities that are doing their own thing, right? They're fallen angels. There's a lot of ways that you can talk about this relationship, like, you know, and this whole imagery of in Christianity, that there was a war in heaven, and then there were some principalities which submitted themselves to the transcendent infinite, and some principalities which didn't, and then they became the fallen angels and the demons and all these chaotic things. And then there's this relationship between the demons and your passions. And so the demon of gluttony, the demon of luxury, okay? And it's like, because that's what happens in yourself. In your own self, those desires, those thoughts, those personalities inside you then are not submitting themselves to your higher self, you could say, to Christ in you, to your center, to your heart, then those end up being subjugated to demons. And so that's why we have demons of different passions, because there's an analogy between, let's say, cosmic principalities that would have their own, that would start to compete between each other and pull the world apart, and your own self, okay? And so you always have to remember, guys, that this stuff, these things, they're talking about things in the world. They're not arbitrary. Angels, demons, God, you know, all this stuff is talking about how the world exists. And like I said, it's not like Marvel Comics arbitrary thing. It's actually ontologically coherent and metaphysically coherent. So, all right. So enough about that. It's like I'm spending way too much time on each question, guys. It's already been like 45 minutes, and I've gotten through almost no questions. All right. Okay. So let's try to go a bit faster on these questions. So hopefully I can have some time for the chat, because I haven't really looked into the chat yet. All right. Okay. So what is a good introduction to understanding Eastern mysticism? This is Jacob Russell asking. And philosophy, particularly from a Christian perspective, are there particular church fathers who do a good job at explaining it? I really think that reading Vladimir Lossky's book, Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church, I think that's the best text, modern text on Eastern mysticism in terms of the fathers. There's a mystical line, you could say, that you can follow, and I think it goes. If we skip the early church fathers, like I think that the early church fathers really do, like Saint Irenaeus, I think has a very mystical vision. But if we go towards the Cappadocians, so Saint Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Basil, Saint Gregory Nazianzus, through the Cappadocians, then towards Saint Maximus the Confessor, Dionysius the Areopagite, and finally Gregory of Palamas. I think that's the best. That's really the best line to understand Eastern mysticism. Really, there is no. It's the best way to go. All right, please explain the ring in the Lord of the Rings. This is Joachim England. I've been thinking about that for a very long time, and I've actually been pondering making a video about just the ring to try to explain it. And so I don't think I'm going to go into it too much. It has to do with the idea of an ornament. And so I can give you a little hint. The problem of ornamentation is a major problem. It's a very mysterious thing. And so imagine you have a chair. And so the chair is made of different elements. The elements come together to make a chair, and then you paint an ornament on the chair. It's like, what is that? It's not part of the chair. It's not part of the function of the chair. It's not part of the chairness of the chair. So what is it? Why do we add ornamentation to something? Why do we wear, ornaments? Why are our vestments ornamented? Or all these questions. Why do we put ornaments on buildings? All these questions. What is this idea of adding something completely foreign to something else as a form of, to make it stand out, right? To make it beautiful, right? So has to do with this game of the garments of skin, this game of the margin, okay? And so on the one hand, the ornament is makes something stand out, right? It makes it stand out from the other. So you have a bunch of boring chairs and you put a gold flower on one of them. It's like, oh, that chair stands out, right? It becomes special. There's that, but there's also this idea of the ornament as a kind of protection. The idea of the gargoyle on the outside, the idea of putting like a chaotic or a foreign design on the outside of something in order to create a buffer between the thing and the rest of the world. So there's this idea of protection. And so the idea of the ring in the Lord of the Rings is really interesting because it's as if the ornament is so powerful that it takes up the whole space and it actually hides what it's covering. And so, the ornament is so powerful that it actually hides the essence of what it's covering. And so that has there's a dual aspect to that. Okay. And so I think that's all I'm going to say for now, but I am probably going to make a video on that at some point, because I think that it could be something important for people to understand, like the idea of how an ornament can actually not show something, but actually hide something. All right. Okay. All right. I'm going to skip some of these because some of these I don't necessarily know the answer to them, and some of them would take serious time to answer. All right, so Russell Pizzle, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, sorry if I'm not, asks, I have read Matt's book and am now wondering more about what it means to be mediator between heaven and earth. Outside of the garden, Paul encourages us to put the flesh to death and to live by the Spirit. This seems to be very one-sided mediation. Some more insight or clarification would be great. I think this can help you to understand also the idea of the ascetic practices, because so you kind of have this. I've talked about this in some of my talks on Saint Gregory of Nyssa, for example. So you have this idea that we've kind of fallen into the flesh, right? We're ruled by flesh, and so in a way, there's a kind of this weird inversion where we're kind of ruled by our flesh, and this flesh kind of leads us to death. And so there's this strange inversion in Christianity, which is that if you kind of take control of that and you put your flesh to death, right? Because flesh is pulling you towards death. But if you put your flesh to death, if you accept to die to the flesh, then it actually flips it. It flips it. It flips it so that then you return to the garden, like you return to the center. And so that shows itself as a removing of the garments of skin, right? So kind of freeing yourselves from the tyranny of flesh. Okay. And so that happens. So it happens really that way. So you try not to be ruled by your belly, try not to be ruled by your libido, try not to be ruled by your greed, try not to be ruled by all the things that connect you to the let's say to the physical world. And to do that, you have to train yourself. So there's an actual training. And so you have to fast. You have to fast in terms of sexuality. You have to fast in terms of food. You have to, let's say, even be willing to be poor, in order to be able to master that. And so it doesn't mean that sex, food, and money are evil. That's not what it means. But it means that in order to free yourselves from the tyranny of the death, that it is to be subject to the outer things, then you put your flesh to death and you live by the Spirit. And so you actually come back towards the inner light, let's say. So you rule by the light, by meaning, by purpose, by by prayer, all those things. And then the image that actually comes, that's interesting, that you see, for example, in St. Gregory of Nyssa, is that when you do that, you remove the garments of skin, you enter into the garden, and then you realize that actually once you're inside, that you regain all those things, right? You're able to live. You're able to, let's say, you could enjoy food without falling. You can use wealth without falling into wealth, without being so you rediscover the goodness of it. Okay. All right, so that's a way to explain that. All right, I'm out of focus here. All right, okay, let's keep going. Okay, I would really love to get your so Vesper Stamper asks, I would really love to get your understanding on two concepts: thin places, most familiar to people in Celtic Christian spirituality, and holy wells. As an author of historical fiction, I'm really interested in how land holds memory, even ancient memory. All right, so she's working on a book on this, and she you can go see the question, like it's quite a long question. All right, I don't know what thin places are. I've never heard that expression. I know what holy places are. Okay, so how can I explain this? Okay, so the world doesn't lay itself out equally. We've kind of talked about this, that the world lays itself out as these points of attention, these centers of meaning, which then unfold and kind of unfold into their different elements. Okay, and so the world is held together by anchors, and so you as a person can also be an anchor, right? You can be an anchor for your community. You can be an anchor even at a higher level as you approach sainthood. So a saint can be an anchor for something, right? Can be a patron for something and can anchor certain realities together. And so you can do that for your community. You can do that for your family. And then within you also have that same structure. So you have anchors that hold you together, and hopefully those all are held together by one central element, which is your spirit, your essence, you could say. Now that is also true out in the world, and so the natural world also doesn't lay itself out equally. It's hard for people to understand that, for modern people to understand it. It actually lays itself out in hierarchies. And it's hard to explain why or how that actually, it can be a very intuitive to why it lays itself out a certain way. And it can be hard to actually to describe why certain places become holy places and then become anchors for the world, right? They become these points of anchor where the world lays itself out around it, but I think that's what those holy places are. Okay. And often you can see it in the structure. So a mountain makes sense, right? We've talked about the mountain before. Makes sense that mountains would become holy places because they are a bodily, they're an embodiment of hierarchy. You could see the same for trees. For example, this idea, a lot of traditions have holy trees. Ancient communities had these sacred trees. So the tree also makes sense that would happen. Sacred poles, like think of the May dance, the people dancing around the pole. And then a holy well would be the same, because the well, more, let's say in a more feminine way, it gathers the waters in one place, so you can kind of imagine the waters underground, seeped into the ground, and then the well gathers the water into one place, and so it becomes a place of focused potential, where then a community can then start to lay itself out around this well. You need water to live, and so you can just see it, right? They find a well, and then people start to build around the well, because they take the water and they bring it out to the well. So the well becomes this focus point of a community, and so that's it's just the way that lays itself out. But I agree that sometimes it can be hard to understand why certain lands or certain things, certain places in the world have been, let's say, holy places for millennia. Even before Christianity, forever, and they're still today holy places. And I don't think it's arbitrary at all. But I don't also think that it's something that everybody can intuit so easily. All right. Okay. All right. So the other questions, I think, are a little bit okay. So let's see. Okay. So what Bradley Ward asks, what was your impression of Jason Horsley? For those who haven't seen it, I did a podcast with Jason Horsley. And he says, I started listening to his podcast. That's for your appearance, and I have to give him credit for struggling for what is real and true. Seems to be an interesting, earnest guy with quite an eclectic family. To be honest, I didn't know anything about Jason Horsley before I did his podcast. He invited me on his podcast, and I kind of looked at it, and I saw the kind of people he was talking to, and I agreed to do it. So I didn't really know anything about him. I think that he's someone who's on it, like Bradley Ward said. I think he's honestly struggling to kind of figure out what's real and what's true. He seems to have a pretty dark past. He talked about being involved in sorcery and witchcraft and all that kind of stuff. And so, but he also seems to be wanting to take that and move towards something which is more Christian, which is more traditional. And so, I can only encourage him to do so. All right, last question. There's one question that I have no idea how to answer. Dead SF asks, the idea of hierarchical interpretation of Scripture, how does this relate to the Rosary? And I don't have an answer to that. I don't know how hierarchical interpretation of Scripture would relate to the Rosary. All right, so Anjo Terpstra says, in your talk with John Vervaeke, you said that the meaning crisis started at the 12th century. Could you elaborate on this? And so, well, wow, I think that would be way too much to go into with you guys. But what I'm going to do is I'll write in the comments of this stream, I'll give you a link to an article that I wrote, which talks about the problem of the 12th century, late 12th century, of Duns Scotus, and also of William of Ockham, and kind of how they represent these two extremes of nominalism and what's called how do you pronounce it? Equivocity. I think that's how you pronounce it. The idea of the idea. So it's the two extremes that happened in the 12th century. The beginning of the two extremes basically are that we put God too high in the sense that we wanted to put God so high that we forgot to understand that God is not. So how can I say this? To make God only transcendent, right? So William of Ockham wanted to make God only transcendent so that he became arbitrary and he could do whatever he wanted. And then he was just this arbitrary God, that had no relationship with the world, and so that's a very disturbing way to see it. And then Duns Scotus talked about the idea that the qualities of God are equivocal to our qualities. And so when we say that God is good in the same way that we are good, but just a lot more. So God is like, if you're a little good, God is like all the good, but it's the same good. And both of those, so that what that does is that it puts God inside the world. It makes God, really makes God that kind of invisible, an invisible bearded guy on a cloud, and so those two extremes, both of those are wrong, right? We need to see God as both infinitely transcendent and infinitely immanent in the world. Both those at the same time are what create a true image of God as infinite. And you find that in even in Aquinas, you still have that. You still have this beautiful relationship between the idea that God is absolutely transcendent, absolutely immanent, and can only be approached through a form of analogy between the world and God, but always knowing that that analogy falls short of the infinite. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. These types of technical questions I don't like, because I feel like when I answer them, I feel like a lot of people will think that I'm just spouting word salad and gibberish. I try to avoid to use technical theological terms. All right. So I am going towards into the chat. All right. All right, I noticed you mentioned, so David Alexander, I noticed you mentioned the Lache trilogy. Do you read much from Father Sophrony? Although Lache is not traveling much now, he used to be around the monastery at Essex a lot. I haven't read much of Father Sophrony. I've liked, and I've heard, good things about him. Some people say that he's very, very strict, and so I don't know enough about him to really say anything. All right. All right, so Jimmy D Thing asks, why is the Holy Spirit symbolized as a dove? Well, because spirit is symbolized as heaven. Heaven, it has different imagery. It can be wind, it can be, and it can be birds. And the dove is a beautiful image of the heavenly coming down, and setting on the world. And so you see that happen in the story of Noah, where Noah releases a dove, and the dove comes down and finds earth. And at the same time, that's why the Holy Spirit comes down on Christ at his baptism, is referring to the story of Noah. That's why it's a dove. But it's a perfect example, because it is really this idea of a heavenly wind which comes in on a person, but you can't show that. You can't see wind on a person, and so the idea of a bird landing on a person is a good way of representing that. All right, so Nathan Randy, he said he heard my question about marriage and Christ and the church. So all right, and wish you a happy honeymoon. All right, Josh Martin, is the Virgin, i.e. the Virgin Mary, a symbol that is distinct from the feminine? There are different aspects of the feminine. And the Virgin is one aspect of the feminine. There's an aspect of the feminine, and the aspect of the Virgin has to do with the notion of let's say untouched potential, of complete of pure potentiality, which is not at all has not at all been defined in any way by a masculine name or a masculine identity. And so that's the importance of virginity, has to do with that. There's also, let's say the symbolism of the whore and the prostitute has to do with kind of saturated potentiality. And so the idea of mixture and confusion, of a woman who joins herself with all these different men, and so has a confused identity, has all these different elements acting on her, and so that would have to do with kind of this idea of confusion and saturation of the feminine. Yeah, there's other aspects of the feminine, but that's what virginity has to do with. Do you have any advice for navigating an interdenominational relationship? Asked Adam Shillard. And I don't know if I have advice, but I am in an interdenominational relationship. My wife, when I got married, I was a Protestant, and then I became interested in Orthodoxy, and I converted to Orthodoxy, and I told my wife that that was not in the marriage agreement, and so I didn't expect her to convert to Orthodoxy. Obviously, I would have liked if she did, but she didn't, and not until now she has not converted to Orthodoxy. My children are all Orthodox, and we negotiated that relationship, but it was a negotiation, and what happens is that it's a constant negotiation. I wouldn't suggest it at the outset for sure, because it's difficult. It's possible. I love my wife. My wife is an amazing spiritual Christian, but I wouldn't recommend it. That's for sure. But I can give you an idea of how we did. For example, the idea of, for example, if you're an evangelical and an Orthodox. So my kids were born, and so the question is, are we going to baptize them or not? And so we had a negotiation, and the negotiation was that just like an evangelical, when the kids ask to be baptized, that's when we baptize them, but we're going to baptize them Orthodox. And so all of my kids were baptized about at the age of 7, which is when they started to ask to be baptized. My daughter was baptized just a few months ago. Actually, my youngest daughter was baptized like a month ago. She was baptized on June 24th on St. John the Baptist Day. So yeah. So I would say I wouldn't recommend it, but at the same time, a lot of people are going to be are not going to agree with me with this, but I would rather you marry a dedicated Christian from another denomination than marry a nominal person from your own denomination, because yeah, because I still think that engagement has value, and yeah. So sorry to all you hardcore Orthodox there. You might not like what I just said there. All right. So Land Bior, oh boy, I can't pronounce that, says, "Hey Jonathan, I was just hoping to hear what you make of all the divisions between Christian groups. Which group is the most true? Does it matter which group you are in, etc.?" All right. And he also asked, what would it take for you to speak at an event? I'd rather answer your second question, which is, if you organize it and if you organize something and you're able to have, let's say, enough funds to pay for my ticket and my stay, and if you can have a little bit of money to pay for my time, then I'll come. I'm not yeah, that's all it takes. Just contact me through social media or through email, and you just need to organize it. I'll say for the other question, all I can say is I became Orthodox because I think that I believe Orthodoxy at this point in time, I think is the fullness, is the most full, the most full version of in the story of Christianity, let's say. Ronald Potts asks, what do you make of Jesus' statement, resist not evil, and how do you apply that to life? So the idea of resist not evil obviously doesn't mean give in to your passions. What it has to do with this idea of being free. It has to do with this idea of not being a slave to other people's intent. And so I think that we always have to see it in that frame, because if someone does something towards you, let's say acts in a bad way towards you, and then you engage them, right, in a certain manner, you are yoking yourself to that person. You are giving them power upon you. Whereas if you do not answer evil, then you are free. And if you can do it also without resentment, without doing it out of cowardice, then you are free. Now, that doesn't mean, I don't think that means that Christians shouldn't defend themselves. And I also don't mean that you shouldn't defend others and that you shouldn't fight off people that are trying to hurt your family or your country or, whatever. I don't think that that entails, one entails the other. I think one has more to do with the idea of being free from yoking yourself to other people's intentions. And I think you can also give yourself in the defense of others. So yeah. All right. All right. There's a lot of questions in here. All right. So Christian Chad asked, do you think there's any sectarianism in the Orthodox Church, specifically between different ethnicities? Also, what should we do about it? Or how can we help persecuted Christians in the Middle East? Yeah, ethnicity is the bane of Orthodoxy. Just it's, on the one hand, it's quality, and on the other hand, it's also it's bane. It's quality in the sense that, because I would say, because of this notion of hierarchy, this idea that there's a hierarchy of identities. The Orthodox don't want to deny local identities. They don't want to say you have to abolish your family or abolish your nation or abolish your people, but rather there's this hierarchy of identities which is reaching towards a transcendent, right? So there are these texts that talk about that we are all one in Christ, that there is neither Greek nor Jew, nor male nor female. All these texts that talk about how everything kind of moves up into this unity. But at least for the Orthodox, that doesn't negate those things at a different level. So it doesn't mean that at the level at which you are male, that you're not male. No, you're male at the level at which you are male. You can transcend that in Christ. You can attain perfect unity in Christ, but to the extent that you feel sexual desire, to the extent that you have genitals, to the extent that you are male, right? To the extent that you live in Greece, that your family is Greek, that your history is Greek, then you're Greek, and I think that the danger, but the danger of that is to not be able to move up towards that unity. And I think that that's something that we see in Orthodoxy, and it's a shame. It's a shame. And I don't know what it is that we can do. Pray, it's frustrating. It's frustrating, especially in America. It's very frustrating because the way that the Orthodox Church is set up in America is a complete scandal. It's a scandal of the church. There should not be in a city ethnic churches that are all Orthodox. It's an absolute scandal that's the way it is, and it's due to the fact that people have put their ethnic reality above the unity of the church. I don't know if it's not easy to solve that problem. I'm not saying it's easy to solve that problem, but I do think it's a scandal. And how can we help persecuted Christians in the Middle East? I know there are organizations that help Christians in the Middle East. There are several organizations, but I don't know them at the top of my head. But you can look. There are some organizations that work with persecuted Christians in the Middle East. Even the organization that I work with called Mennonite Central Committee, they're Mennonites, they're not even Orthodox, but their main partner, let's say in Syria, is the Syrian Orthodox Church, and also in Lebanon and in those areas. And so if you, for example, give money to Mennonite Central Committee for their projects in Syria, you will be partnering with persecuted Christians who are trying to survive in difficult situations. But there are other organizations that do that, and you can check them out on your own. All right. And so Lambiord says one of the reasons I'm hesitating to orthodoxy is the perceived cultural sectarianism, and I totally understand that. It's not that there aren't challenges to being Orthodox. It's not easy. There are definitely challenges. I would say that if you're still interested in Orthodoxy, that you just need to look around you to see if there are churches that are willing that do the services in the local language. So if there's a church in, I don't know where you're from, let's say in America, we have the Orthodox Church of America. There's also the Antiochian Church and some Rokor churches, some Russian Orthodox churches outside of Russia that will have the services in the local language. Usually, if they have the services in the local language, it means it's a place where you could probably find a community that's willing to move beyond just their ethnic sectarianism. All right. All right, I got people answering each other's questions in there. That's good. I like that. Jacob Russell says, it's kind of crazy to think that right now, if you peeked into Jonathan's room, you would see and hear him talking to himself. Yes, exactly. It's very weird. And often you'll see my daughters. My daughters, what they like to do when I'm making videos is they like to come and they put their face in this window and then they just kind of put their face there. They actually did that once when I was making a video with Jordan Peterson. All of a sudden, I'm like talking to Jordan Peterson and I see like these girls with their faces in the windows behind it. Just hilarious. All right, Jacob Russell asks, what's the deal with hair? 2 prophets are taken to places by their hair. Elisha curses 2 kids for mocking his lack of hair. Samson's strength is connected to his hair. Yeah, Jacob, I saw that comment of yours. I thought you'd put it in the videos section. I've been thinking about making a video about that. So I think I might be making a video about that because I think it's important in understanding garments of skin and all that stuff. Yeah. Okay. David Alexander says, Father Sophrony, Father Ephraim. And he says, I probably confused them. And yes, I think you're right. I probably did. Sorry about that. Hopefully none of them will hear this. All right. All right. So the ideas of, okay. Barrett Somerville, the question about the rosary. Okay. Let's see if we can get more specifics. So the idea of my question with the rosary and how it relates to hierarchical interpretation, symbols like the cross around one neck can represent Christ's sacrifice. So I still don't totally understand what you're talking about. Christian Shad said Lebanese Orthodox dating a Catholic, by the way. It's hilarious. All right. Okay. Okay. So I can maybe say a few things about rosaries in general. Probably not. I'm not sure I totally know how to answer this. I'm also kind of running out of steam, guys. I have to put on the spotlight in my office, and in the summer it just kills me. It gets really hot. I think I'm probably going to check out. It's almost been an hour and a half, and I think we did okay. I think you guys had some good questions this time. I really have to kind of reserve I have to reserve the possibility of not answering all the questions you guys give me, because sometimes it could land me in trouble if it's something that I don't know enough about, or that I'm just kind of talking out of the side of my mouth. So it was great. Let's see how many people made it. So you guys ended up being 12 in the chat. That's pretty cool. And so once again, I want to thank all you guys for supporting me on Patreon. I hope you've been following what's been happening. I hope you followed the story of the graphic novel that I'm preparing with Mathieu and Cord Nielsen, who's an artist all you guys should check out. So I'm going to Seattle next week. I'll be giving a few talks. I put those talks on my website if you want to if you're near Seattle. Then after that, I will be in South Carolina for like almost 2 months in Charleston after giving my workshop. So if you're in the South, It would be great to hear from you guys. And I will also probably be at Florida State University at the end of October, but that's the dates aren't totally set for that. Then I will be in Toronto at a few events also in September as well. But I'll give you guys all the details for that. So, but just stay tuned if you want to come to an event. There's going to be quite a few lined up in the next few months. And I think I told you guys about a possible event with Jordan Peterson again. That is being pushed back because Jordan's schedule is just completely filled up. It seems like if it's going to happen, it's going to be in February or March in Vancouver. So yeah, so it was great to talk to you guys, and I will see you hopefully in a month. Maybe I won't be, if I don't do the Q&A next month, it's because I'm in Charleston, and if I don't have a good enough connection, what I'll end up doing is I'll just make an extra video for you guys talking about a fairy tale. So if you guys want to even to give me some ideas of some fairy tales you'd like to hear me interpret, that could be cool. You could do that on Patreon. And so yeah, I will see you guys soon. It was good to talk to you guys.